who doesn't like the coverage he's receiving, a false story deliberately planted to impact an election, or an internet hoax concocted purely to get revenue-generating clicks, we seem to be awash in news we can't use. Add to this the mixture of perpetual presence of over-the-top political spin, biased reporting, and hyperbole-laced public relations material, and it is little wonder that trust levels in institutions once generally believed are now at record lows. According to the Edelman Trust Barometer, an annual global survey on trust and credibility, trust is in crisis around the world. This year's report revealed the largest ever drop in the trust levels for business, government, non-governmental organizations, and the news media. Listen to what the organization says in its press release for this year's report. Trust in the media, at 43%, fell precipitously and is at an all-time low in 17 countries, while trust levels in government, at 41%, dropped in 14 markets and is the least trusted institution in half of the 28 countries surveyed. The credibility of leaders, which we're all very interested in public relations, is also in peril. CEO credibility dropped 12 points globally to an all-time low of 37%, plummeting in every country studied, while government leaders, at 29%, remain the least credible. And there are real and dangerous consequences to this loss of trust. The report concludes that with the fall of trust, there's now a majority of the populations in the surveyed countries who lack full belief that societal systems are working for them. This stokes fear and is spurring the rise of populist movements intent on blowing the systems up without any real ideas about what to replace them with. Fake news is not really anything new, of course. Almost as soon as Johannes Gutenberg printing press began allowing news to circulate widely, it was used to disseminate false stories, whether about fantastic sea monsters or Jews drinking the blood of Christian children to celebrate Passover. In the United States, none other than Mark Twain was known to create a blood-soaked murder story out of whole cloth when he was writing for the Territorial Enterprise, a newspaper in Virginia City, Nevada. And although there are some doubts about the complete authenticity of the anecdote itself, New York Journal editor William Randolph Hearst is famously said to have telegraphed an artist covering simmering tensions in Cuba in 1897, "You furnish the pictures and I'll furnish the war." And I don't think we can deny that public relations profession has contributed to the spread of fake news at times. When we make exaggerated claims, overuse superlatives, or produce video news releases that blur the distinction between news and advocacy, we become part of the problem. Kevin Lomagino of healthnewsreview.org discussed the origins of poor news coverage on medical studies at a recent Association of Healthcare Journalists workshop and made this telling comment that can probably be applied much more broadly than health news coverage. "We try to offer constructive criticism," he said, of his organization. "A lot of what we see is sloppy, incomplete, not well researched, maybe a bit sensationalized. Where does this sloppiness start? I think a case can be made that a lot of it originates with press releases from institutions that conduct studies. History has seen fake news stories used to enrage populations against enemies or ethnic groups. To entertain with tantalizing stories about Marilyn Monroe, John Kennedy, and Elvis alive and well long after their deaths, and to point out society's foibles through satire publications like The Onion. But there's no denying that there's a sharper edge of late. When a president of the United States proclaims the Fourth Estate an enemy of the people, and a foreign government seeks to manipulate an election by disseminating fake news through social media, the issue has reached an entirely new plane of seriousness. Today, we have an esteemed panel of professional communicators who will help us dissect this issue just a bit. I feel pretty comfortable in saying that we won't have all of the answers to the problems today. But I do hope that during this month, when our profession focuses on specifically on ethics, we can shed a little light on the challenges and offer some ideas about the things we can do to restore trust and truth in this era of alternative facts. I'm privileged to introduce our panelists today. And first, I'm going to introduce right in the middle, Chip Felkel. Chip is founder of the Felkel Group. He is a veteran public affairs strategist, media relations expert, and advocacy innovator with more than 2 decades of experience in the state and national arenas. Felkel's extensive political resume includes roles with the South Carolina Republican Party and the Republican National Committee. In addition, he's played major roles with the Campbell for South Carolina Governor campaign, the 1988 Bush-Quayle campaign, the Dement 2002 congressional reelect, and the Bush-Cheney 2000 and 2004 presidential campaigns. Next to him, on his left, is Julie Horton. Julie is the governmental relations manager for the city of Greenville. In her role, she serves as an advocate for the city at the local, state, and federal level. She's responsible for legislative liaison activities with the local, state, and federal elected officials and related governmental and quasi-governmental bodies, which includes lobbying on the state and federal levels for appropriations, grant funding, and legislation beneficial to local governments and their constituents. Prior to joining the city of Greenville, she served in several positions within the public relations and governmental affairs arenas, including stints as VP of Communications for both the Greenville and South Carolina's Chamber of Commerce. She served as Press Secretary, Director of Public Information for the South Carolina Attorney General's Office, and the first Director of Public Relations for Irwin Penland Advertising, as well as a broadcast news reporter. And last but not least is Amy Wood. And of course, you probably recognize Amy. She's an Emmy Award-winning interactive news anchor for WSPA and WYCW. She also leads the station's innovation team and is a member of the digital team. As one of the first news anchors in the country to incorporate social media with news in 2008, she is considered a pioneer in the industry. The online community she connects with has grown to nearly 200,000, and that may be even larger now. Amy grew up in the New York metropolitan area and started her career covering blizzards and breaking news in western Minnesota at KSA XTV. She was named Anchor of the Year by the South Carolina Broadcasters Association in 2012, nominated again in 2014 by the Radio and Television and Digital News Association of the Carolinas, and named Anchor of the Year again in 2016. So we want to welcome all of our guests today. What we would do to start with is to allow each of them to just speak for a moment to the issue, just to kind of get us started and maybe share some of your thoughts. And possibly, if you've actually experienced fake news from the standpoint of maybe being fooled by a fake news story, or felt maybe personally attacked by a fake news story, or anything like that, feel free to kind of jump in and tell us that story while we're getting started here. And we'll start with Amy. How about that? We'll put you on the spot first off.
Actually, I wound up detecting a fake news story last night when we had this story that hit in Spartanburg. It's from I don't even remember the website, and I don't want to give them a plug anyway, but it's a prank website. And so anybody can go and create a website on this thing, and you're supposed to oblige by certain community rules. It's supposed to just be a joke site, like you pull a joke on a friend and make a crazy headline about them or something. But they did a story about Spartanburg having a serial killer on the loose, 7 women were dead, blah. I mean, it just went on and on and on. They're not telling anybody yet. All the victims' families want to stay anonymous. It was ridiculous, really, if you start to think about it. But people, having had the Todd Colpep story, now suddenly it's like, well, we could have a serial killer around here. It's possible. And so suddenly people were sharing this. And I think this website, honestly, as I went back and checked it over and over again last night, the first time I looked, it had 55,000 shares. The second time, it had 30,000 shares. I don't know if they're putting up bogus share numbers, or if Facebook was starting to detect it as bogus, they were starting to take the shares away from it. I don't know. But it bothered me in this age of Facebook allegedly, kind of looking for fake news, that this thing wouldn't have been detected and stopped sooner. But anyway, it was exploding last night. We actually had to do a story on it because the city, we were going to ignore it for a while, but then the city police posted something. We said, okay, at this point we've got to do something. So we just mentioned it in the news last night to make sure that people realize this is not real. Please stop sharing this. You know, it's not helping the community to have fake stuff out there. But it happens. I think one of the cool things that I've noticed, and my point about the whole problem with fake news and just alternative facts and the confusion that's out there, is that I think it comes back down to relationships. Because the cool part that happened last night was that people reached out to me, a trusted source, and said, Amy, is this true? I mean, I got inundated. The station page got inundated too, but I personally had tons of messages coming in. Is this true? Tell me if this is true, tags in it. And that made me feel good, because I'm like, okay, at least people are going, wait, I do think I can trust her, and she's going to tell me whether this is legit or not. And then the fact that people were asking the question. So I feel like people's antennas are starting to go up a little bit more, and I think the more we have these conversations, the more that will happen.
Yeah. I know myself, when I was noticing more and more on my social media feeds, whenever a friend posts something that's not true, a lot of my other friends are pretty quick to throw out there that, hey, this is, you know, check Snopes, check another site that will help you know that this is fake news. And I think we are slowly but surely maybe becoming educated a little bit more as consumers of news about watching sources. How about you, Chip? What kind of story you might have related to fake news?
I guess the first thing is, you know, I need to update my bio because 3 decades, not 2 decades now. And most of what we do now as a firm is issue advocacy projects. So it might be a wide range of we run into misinformation. It comes from a couple of different sources, but how many of you ever shared something without reading it? Has anybody in here ever shared anything without reading the whole story?
Just read the headline.
Yep. You just read the headline. Okay. How many of you, when you're in the grocery store, are guilty of at least glancing over at the National Enquirer? Maybe not buying it, but reaching over and just checking that headline out a little bit. So if you take that environment and you take what is sadly just an onslaught of what I'm going to call tribalism within our society right now, and you throw in a little bit of laziness, or a lot of laziness, and you have the environment that we're in. I'm guilty of reposting something, and then as quickly as I've been notified, I'm very quick to go in and pull it down. I try to use my social media to put stuff out there that I think is. I don't try to be provocative. I try to make people think, and I go to pretty good lengths to try to make sure that I'm not just throwing something out there for red meat, because I can't stand it. Because most of the time people then weigh in, and I saw a quote here that I shared with these guys earlier. You know how dogs bark at things they don't understand? An awful lot of people are like that too. They don't take the time to understand it, is my point. So what we're seeing with fake news, whatever, and I don't like that term.
Yeah.
I started in journalism at Carolina, and because I believe that the press has a very important role. I think that it's one of the foundations of our country. But I do think the media, again, present company not included, but I do think the media has played a role in putting in a situation where this kind of environment could happen. But it's up to people like you, with good press releases, with making sure you're giving the whole story, with giving me, if I'm a reporter, if I'm the news director, and something comes across, giving me everything I need to know to make a decision on this story. Don't leave stuff out. Sometimes too much is, maybe it doesn't all get printed, but at least you've given them, everything and the information they need to make an assessment on whether something's a story. I work in the world of a lot of our clients, it ends up being more high profile. If we don't get it right, she gets to report about it. But it's also very easy for things to be misconstrued. But it's misconstrued because people don't take the time to actually dig a little bit. A, on the side of putting it out there, and B, the consumer has gotten so lazy that they take everything at face value, which has now put us in a situation where we're having this conversation. So that's kind of how I think we've got here. Julie?
My personal opinion about why we've gotten to where we've gotten, I think all constituencies share some guilt in that, and I've been a part of all those constituencies. I also was a graduate of University of South Carolina in journalism. I went in and worked for a radio station, and I'm older than a lot of you, but this was back in the day when it wasn't ripping and reading headlines from the newspaper. We had 6 reporters on staff. We didn't have cell phones. We didn't have the internet. We didn't have any of that. I went on to become the press secretary for the state attorney general, and at the time, there was no email. We had a computer, but all the computer was a glorified typewriter, and we used a program called DisplayWrite. When the attorney general was going to be on TV that night to talk about an issue, and we wanted to make sure that people within the office knew about it, I had to go to my glorified DisplayWrite, type it out. He's going to be on TV tonight, and put it in the elevator so people would see it. I mean, that's
Broadcasting.
yeah, yes, exactly. And back in that day too, a lot of people didn't have fax machines. We did a lot of death penalty cases, and a lot of death penalty cases at the Attorney General's office, and a lot of big statewide federal cases. And if there was ever an opinion that was issued from the state Supreme Court, they didn't have a fax machine, so they would print them out, and we'd have to physically go and pick those up. And I moved to Greenville, and
See how easy you got it?
and it tells you how old I am too. And then I came to Greenville, and I became Joe's first PR director, and I was doing a lot of work with Bell Atlantic 9X Mobile, which is now Verizon. We were using analog bag phones.
That's what I was
Just then was the internet coming into being and trying to sell things on the internet. So I just tell you all of that. Yes, it sounds backward, but also there was a little bit of safety in that about the broad dissemination of false information. And then we had the internet, then we had smartphones, then we had social media platforms. And I think that a 24-hour news cycle, we didn't have that at the time. I think all of those things have contributed to where we have gotten today. But going back to what Chip said, and I'll read this quote because I don't ever get it right, but this is from one of our founding fathers, Thomas Jefferson. An educated citizenry is a vital requisite for our survival as free people. And as Chip said, we've gotten lazy about being educated. We take a headline and we run with it. Or we take politically biased propaganda and we run with it. And it's very bothersome, and I will say, I saw the story that Amy made reference to about the serial killer and it being secret. 2 stories came to my attention in the past couple of weeks that really bothered me, and we've got to do something about it. I heard Congressman Trey Gowdy speak to a group Monday. He talked about the dissemination of false information, and there was a story that went out that his son had died. And he saw that, and he had to call his wife and say, what's up? But can you imagine getting that call? His wife getting that call? Very bothersome, and for what? And I also saw something about Governor Scott in Florida. After Irma bruised and tore apart Florida, Governor Scott was out surveying the damage, and there was an article that was being shared on social media that Governor Scott had been hit in the head by a fallen tree, was in critical condition, and they didn't know if he was going to survive. And I'm thinking, what is that for? Is just clickbait? Is it for money?
Yeah,
What?
I
Yeah.
get it.
Yeah, what is
I don't
it?
get the motivation.
Right, what is it? So I would just say, very bothersome. The technology that we have now is great, but there's also great responsibility that should come with that
It's a
technology.
great gift, but it's being so violently misused.
Yes.
We do have our civic knowledge, generally speaking, is so woefully out of whack. We don't teach civics like we used to in schools. And so it makes it even easier for people to then make assumptions. We have a situation where it is laziness. I go back to laziness and tribalism. The same reason you're friends with somebody on Facebook or you follow them is that you feel like you have some affinity or you want to have some affinity, maybe you pull for the same team they do or whatever. That doesn't make them an authority on the U.S. government. It doesn't make them an authority on a particular policy. It doesn't make them an authority on much of anything other than their own life. And we give, so the whole, you know, this whole environment, we give people, you know, you can't say you give them benefit of the doubt. You're giving people incredible power they don't deserve when you take something that may be half-baked, and oftentimes is, and you share it, and we're all guilty of it, without maybe doing your own research. Now, from a PR perspective, don't make it easy for things to be manipulated. Get your facts right. Be more thorough. Don't assume, I mean, you know, oftentimes you don't like a headline. Guess what? The person that wrote the story usually doesn't write the headline. You know that, right? So, God, we have this great story, but nobody's going to read it, or whether they're going to read it, they're going to see this headline that is completely out of whack with what we, you know, and there's clickbait for you. I mean, you had the early form of clickbait back in the day was when you had these things called newspapers. I don't know if any of you read those. Yeah, but where you would bust your to get a story and get all the facts, and then it would go down to the print room, and some guy didn't read the story but threw up a headline on it that was completely out of whack. Well, that's no different than what you've got going on now.
Yeah.
It's just being done from technology.
Do you
But
think?
it's laziness on the part of everybody.
Yeah, I was going to say, so I'm hearing some different things come out from you all in terms of hearing about social media, hearing about politics. Do you feel like that there is sort of a single driving force that's really pushing fake news today to a greater extent than in the past?
I think the biggest thing that's happening, and I'm going to talk about more significant fake news,
Yep.
bad term, than serial killer fake stories and stuff like that. I'm talking about the political environment and all this
Clemson did not win the national championship.
Yeah,
All of
the
you have been
serious-
misled, right?
Says all the USC parents up here and alumni.
To
right?
USC.
Well, I think it boils down to actually individual people not wanting to hear the facts. In other words, you know, you get so siloed into your mindset and the kind of news you want to hear and the slant on the story that you want, that you ignore the facts. You don't, and when we report the facts, you call them fake. You know,
You
so
don't like it, it's fake.
yeah, you don't like it, it's fake. And so I think it honestly is much more of an individual consumer issue than it is the institutional issues. Because if you have people who are determined not to look at both sides, who just want to hear one side of the equation and they dismiss everything else as bogus, then I don't know how you fix that. You know, I don't know how you fix that. I will say there's some hope because I have a daughter who is a USC student. And then I have a daughter who's a 13-year-old middle schooler in public school in South Carolina. And she gets the opportunity to take current events, probably because she's my kid. And she always signs up for it every year, all the time. And she says that they have been talking more and more about how to really look at information and evaluate it. And so they're doing sort of critical thinking on what they're looking at. Is this really legit? What makes this a good source and a bad source and that kind of thing. So that gives me some hope that maybe we're going to help another generation coming up do a better job of discerning. But
There seems to be a real lack of demand for authenticity.
For what?
For authenticity.
authenticity.
You take too much on face value.
How do you
Without
think?
digging into whether or not something's a really legitimate story, whether they're a legitimate source on something, whether they're actually, you know, whether the person who's claiming to have the solution to this actually has any possible idea what they're talking about, but because they're in some other position that they're given that power, if you will, without being challenged. And in some cases, I think the press has a role to challenge that.
Mm-hmm.
The press also has a role also in just printing news.
Well,
Yeah.
let me just say this about the press too. We all know that journalism has changed. If you've read the newspaper, you know the newspaper is different than what a newspaper was 5 years, 10 years ago, 15 years ago. It was considered the authority. And the way that the business models have changed with print media, you're trying to cover the 24-hour news cycle now. You're trying to get all the social media platforms. You're trying to come up with a full-fledged story that runs in print the next day. with a lot fewer people and a lot less oversight. I think back to, I think we all know Greenville News has whittled down a lot of numbers over there. But they had a guy, he's long gone, but he was named an investigative reporter for the Greenville News. And when I talked to him, I thought, well, you're not the kind of investigative reporter that I used to deal with years ago. Bill Fox, most recently, the managing editor at Greenville News. This guy was the best investigative journalist I've ever seen in my life. He went and dug around in landfills to find documents that USC President Holman threw away years ago. He worked the news cycle 24/7. I mean, he just put the shoe leather to it. But this other guy I'm talking about came a little later, and we were talking one day, and he said, I'm supposed to be an investigative journalist, and I'm really supposed to delve deep into the issues. But it's really hard for me to do that because I have to carry a camera with me now when I cover something. So I'm shooting video or taking photos. I have to do 6 treatments a day that have to go out on social media platforms while I'm trying to write the full-fledged story for the next day. It's hard to do investigative journalism for the next day. And then you're trying to take care of all of these other things as well. So it's become very difficult for journalists to do the job that they would like to do simply because the business model has changed.
This
How do
is
you
true.
think? How do you think it's this what's going on with this concept of fake news or alternative facts? How does that color? How has that colored our relationships with each other from a professional standpoint, in the sense of public relations folks dealing with the news media, governmental relations folks dealing with the news media dealing with us and the public? Do we somehow, are we less trusting of our colleagues than we used to be because of this particular issue? Does it make us more careful?
You kind of touched on it in your opening comments. I mean, just think about all those institutions you named that people have little faith in.
Just scary.
What do you believe in?
Yeah.
If you don't believe in your leaders, if you don't believe in your government, if you don't believe in the press, if you don't believe in, hopefully, some of us still believe in the church, which we see, unfortunately, we see those numbers going down as well too. So what is it we believe in? And what can we have faith in, and what do we put our confidence in? Well, you go back to being lazy, you believe what you want to believe, what makes you comfortable, or unfortunately, reinforces your own belief system to make you feel better about yourself. It's like getting those, what is it they talk about, endorphins that kick in when you get a like on your page.
Yeah.
It's no different. People liking you post a story that may or may not be completely factually correct. But by God, I got 122 likes, I must be doing something right.
I think
But if it's fake.
But I think it goes back to what Amy talked about earlier as far as our relationships. It's building the relationships. Do I trust Amy? Heck yeah, I trust Amy. Do I trust Chip? It's because we've built relationships.
you didn't answer that question.
She patted me knowingly.
I trust you. But it's building relationships. And when I used to do PR and I would train store managers on how to deal with the media or how to practice public relations, you can't just put out a press release and expect that there's coverage. You've got to build relationships with the media. The media, and Amy's very good at this, she is proactive in building relationships within the community. And by doing that, you trust each other. One of the things when I first started working in PR and I was working at the Attorney General's office, and again, this tells how old I am, but it was back in the day of Rolodexes. You didn't have a smartphone to keep your contacts. And, yeah, I know. And the PR director at that time, he was talking to a reporter from Augusta. He kept a Rolodex. He had that reporter's name in it. And that reporter had told the PR director that his wife had had a baby a year ago. He hadn't talked to this reporter in a year. So while he's talking to the reporter, he flips the Rolodex and goes, well, how's your baby doing? His name was Jack, right? That reporter was so impressed that this PR director remembered all this information about him. It is about rebuilding relationships because we're all people. And we like to know that you care about what we think, what we have to say, what's going on in our lives. And so if you don't build the relationships, you don't have the trust.
To that point, how many of you like getting a phone call from somebody you hadn't talked to them in a long while, kind of casually know them, and they call you and they need a favor. How inclined are you to take action? It's no different than working with the press. It's no different than working with other people. That's that cultivating of that relationship. Don't call me when you need something. Call me to see how my day is every now and then. I might be willing to take a look at your story and place that and give you what you're looking for. If the last time we talked wasn't 2 years ago at a cocktail party in passing, and now you're telling me you really, really, really need my help, I mean, it's no different than that. The intersection here has to be able to build trust. And if a good reporter knows you're not giving them bogus information, you burn a reporter once, God help you. Okay? It won't happen again. And you have to think about that in terms of not just relationships with people, but relationships and dealing with the press and vice versa. You don't have because it's so easy to email. We've lost the art of handwritten notes, something I love. But I am dating myself now.
You're old too.
I am old too, but we have lost that cultivation because it's just so easy to send an email, send a text. I was afraid my 16-year-old was going to break up with a little girl texting her. Thank God he didn't. But we have gotten into that, and that too. There's the technology doesn't humanize the interaction. Okay, it doesn't allow there to be a human necessarily, a real human on the other end that you're dealing with, that you have to take into consideration. You're just sending stuff out.
Well, how often are you guys sending the email to what we call the WSBA assignment desk email versus developing a relationship with somebody like me or one of our reporters, especially if you're in an area and you can kind of watch the newscasts and watch the reporters in the paper and know who's kind of covering various areas or beats. So if you know you're a Greenville-based business, you might want to talk to some of the Greenville or develop the relationship with the Greenville-based people. But most of the time, PR folks will just send a mass email, and honestly, what's really annoying is sometimes it's the ones where it went to the station address, your address, so you get like 15 copies of the same email, versus trying to kind of work with somebody and develop a sort of a personal pitch with someone. The key to that is that if you were to pitch me or one of our reporters, they have to go into meetings every day with story ideas. So first of all, you may be doing them a favor because you're giving them one more pitch they can bring forward in the meeting. And second of all, if you have an advocate for your story within the newsroom, that's a big piece of it, because somebody else might have done that, and then there's your generic press release, and what gets lost in that shuffle is probably the one that nobody's kind of going, hey, I talked to them, and they said they've got a personal angle, and they've got this person lined up, they could get me, it should work out, So we can sell it for you in a sense if we believe in the story and think it's a good one.
I'm curious how these folks deal with. So you put a story out there, you put a press release out. SPA reported on it. You got a blurb in the Greenwood News or the Spartanburg Herald, and then a week later, someone has taken that story and now manipulated it where about 30% of it is accurate. So I'm curious how
Does that happen?
how does that happen, and how do you deal with it? How do you go tackle that?
So what I find challenging is, we have good news and we have bad news, and we understand that the bad news has to be reported. But where we struggle is that manipulation of the headline that makes it seem 10 times worse than it really is. And so, again, it goes back to that personal relationship and being able to call that reporter and say, hey, maybe is there any way you could just change that one word that's really misleading?
But having that relationship, be able to do that.
Relationship. But, and we understand that the business model has changed, and clicks and comments and shares and all of that is driving, the social media world is really driving the news sometimes, and we struggle with that, but the ability to pick up the phone and have a conversation and maybe make some changes to that or even to the content as well. But I know with some stations too, the people who are doing the digital are not the same people who are reporting the story, and so there's a big gap there as well. So social media and its impact you know, we don't wanna have to always call and be asking for those asking
Right.
for those changes. You know, we don't wanna keep going to the well and asking for favors essentially, so that's, you know, that puts us strain on that relationship sometimes, but
Well, but
having a
if you do
relationship
think,
makes a
if you
difference.
do think there is error or misleading or whatever in it, you need to call us, because, I mean, we need to address that, and we often will, I mean, we're pretty, not flexible, I mean, we're not gonna do what you want, but I mean, if we're getting it wrong, or we're totally blowing something out of proportion, we do have young people on our, digital side. Generally, our reporters do post their own stuff, but sometimes they're in just a technological situation where they can't get access to whatever the system is, so they will email it in, and then they're not in charge of the headline. So,
Right.
you know, so that's the kind of thing where then digital guys post what is the meat of their story, but then they do write the headline and it may be different. So, yeah, we've had some issues with that kind of stuff happening, and so we're not one to not adjust that if it's appropriate.
And then the secondary too sometimes is that 24-hour news cycle and the rush to get a story up before we've been given an opportunity to tell our side of the story. So that story goes out, it gets posted online, it's being shared all over the place, people are commenting, reacting to it, but we haven't, and of course, we would love the ability to respond and give you a response in 1 minute, but that doesn't work. I mean, the levels of bureaucracy we have to go through to get approval on, you know, a sentence that has 12 words in it is unbelievable, but, you know, we're working hard to get it done because we want our side of the story, but a lot of times we're not given that, or we're given it after the fact, after everybody's already seen the story, and so we struggle with that. Again, that's just kind of the rise of the digital age and some of those circumstances, and not every news outlet does that, but
Yeah.
we have experienced that a number of times.
But being first versus facts.
Right.
Okay, believe it or not, our time is going to run out on us in just a few minutes.
Wow.
And it's gone by already really fast. There's so much more I want to talk about, but I want to give everybody a chance to ask one more question out here, but before we do that, do you have one suggestion, one idea that you would want to share with all of us as far as how we can be a part of the solution? We know we've described the problem pretty well today, and we have talked about a couple of things related to solutions. We've talked about building relationships. We've talked about us being more thorough in our jobs, to check information and put information out. Anything else that kind of comes to your mind about things that we can be doing to help turn this around?
Well, I think as a PR professional, the one thing that PRSA pounds into us, and I am accredited with PRSA, and one of the things that was pounded into me is that PR is not some lower level function within an organization. It has to be at a very high level. You have to have a seat at the table in management, and you have to be able to deal with those at the high level in the messaging and push that you have to be very honest and be very open. But if you don't have a seat at the table and it's being filtered down to you, especially young PR professionals that really don't have their feet very wet and they're just being told to say something, it can be very narrow and it won't have the credibility with the press and maybe the public that it would have if you have a seasoned PR professional at the management table, helping craft the message, help pushing truthfulness, and being very open and honest.
I would say urging your clients to recognize that if they ignore something, then they do so at their own peril. It may not be a good story for your organization. It may not be, the best news. But if you just ignore it, it won't go away. And then you are responsible for whatever does happen in terms of how the situation gets reported. Getting that seat at the table and convincing those decision makers, those higher ups, that they have to participate in this process as much as they quote unquote can't stand the press. That they, in this environment that we're in, they have no choice but to get out ahead of something as opposed to playing catch up.
Great advice. Amy?
I would just say if you ever see anything erroneous, wrong, unfair, don't be afraid to call us on it, to make the phone calls, to ask for adjustments. Again, we're not gonna craft a story just so it's, you know, your perfect story, but if there's something that's unfair or unjust about what we personally at Channel 7 or any other media organization has done, I really do think you need to let the, you know, start with the reporter, because the reporter, you know, give them a chance to kind of fix it. Don't necessarily escalate to the top manager unless the reporter's giving you no results, but, you know, give them a chance to try to fix what they've done. I do feel like journalism has become a continuum, you know, where you post the story, but then people start, well, I don't know that we have comments on stories anymore, but people sometimes are commenting, and there's education that happens in the process where you tell the story, you think you've got it completely right, and then somebody brings another angle to the conversation that helps you widen out the story. So a lot of us consider anything we post to be something that's sort of a living, breathing document in a way where it can be adjusted and the coverage can expand and include more. I know Greenville Today, sometimes they'll post something, they're like, let us know if you know more things, and they add more to it, you know. So, I mean, we do a lot of that kind of thing in our business now, and don't be afraid to, you know, sort of be part of that conversation, bring things to the table, and bring us your story ideas too.
Any questions from out here?
I
Yes.
can make a comment as a small business person, never having dealt with a public relations firm and just getting into that time where we have, how important it is for small business people to have a firm that helps them tread that kind of slippery slope of how do we get our message out to you or to, so it's great to have a firm to help small businesses, and you guys need to talk to a lot of more small businesses because we need this kind of help. And the stories are just great that way.
Any other questions?
Question.
Yes.
You made,
Julie.
Julie, you made a comment on the relationship. What happens when the relationship sours and all of a sudden you've got someone who takes to social media and, I mean, it hasn't happened to me because I'm 6'6", and I'll kill them, but no, I mean, just, I mean, that's what part of social media is now. Another problem with social media is because it can be used as a tool against you. And I mean, what kind of time frame, I mean, I know you've got to be on top of it as soon as possible, but what can you do against that?
And you can weigh in. I think that what you need to do is confront it head on and ask to sit down with somebody, and if it involves bringing higher ups in there, as far as accountability, that you have to do that.
I mean,
Now,
and with kids and all now, it's really, you know,
Right.
because it's being used more as a tool for bullying.
Oh, yeah.
But, you know, I actually thank you, Amy, for it. As soon as you posted that this morning on the mass murder or whatever was going on, I saw it, you know, I thought it on Facebook. I tagged somebody who put it on
And
my
shared it.
Facebook, shared it this morning, but
Yeah.
Michelle.
Yeah.
But it is, you know, it's, and I blame it all on this. Your phone beeps and you open up and you look at what just came across, whether it's right, wrong, or indifferent. I mean, I'm sitting here, you're talking, I hear my phone beep, I flip open, and it's either a headline comes across or something that's happened somewhere, and we've shortened our attention span to that point.
One of the-
But Chip, I'm watching this thing on Vietnam with Ken Burns,
Watching too.
and it's not, misinformation didn't just start this week.
no.
No, I thought that was a very interesting point that
So
yeah.
true.
Yeah, it's great. If you haven't, go tape it, go watch them, you know. Ken Burns, once again, has done a fantastic job. But no, it hasn't. And unfortunately, that was part of what led to the turmoil in this country in the 60s because there was so much misinformation. And yes, the government played a role in that, in not, you know, announcing what we were committed to, what we were doing. Maybe we're, it's another phase of that, another cycle that we're going through in terms of institutions, lack of trust. But it is, again, I go back, it's just too easy to, challenging the status quo does not mean calling somebody names.
Right.
It means you can have a difference of opinion, but it doesn't mean you have to be ugly about it. You can have a difference of opinion. And we break it all down. We lost civility. We've lost civility.
And there's
Yeah, that's true.
there's cyber courage, but if you get people out from behind that keyboard and you're face to face,
Keyboard warriors.
Well, I use
it's harder to be as ugly.
I use the phrase with our clients that want to pin too much on digital. is that you're setting yourself up for digital assaults fueled by keyboard courage.
How do you feel, though? I feel like, though, if you are, quote unquote, as a business or something, or an institution being bullied by some disgruntled people, or just people who are just out to get you, or just be jerks online, I do think confronting it, I'm amazed at how many times we've had some just, snarky jerks who post stuff on my page or the station page, and when you actually interact with them, they don't expect you to. They expect you to ignore it, delete it or something. When you actually interact with them and are transparent and do put out the other side, it gets kind of amusing, because then suddenly, especially if you've got fans to your business or you or whatever, they will start liking, what you've posted, and everyone starts kind of discounting what the other person has. So I really kind of feel like you can sort of win that. If you are a reputable, good business, you should be able to win that conversation. If you're not, you got a whole nother problem, right? If you're selling a bad product, if your business is in trouble, you got another issue there. But if you are selling something good, the truth really should outweigh the junk that's out there.
And you can refute what they're saying, and then they have to defend what they're saying, or they're gonna call you an ugly name. If they call you an ugly name, a lot of credibility's gone.
Yeah, I know, they start looking really stupid.
Okay, I think our time is, let's go one more. You got it real
One
quick?
last question,
Okay,
real
sure.
quick. Other than the National Enquirer, what do you guys feel, that's a joke, do you feel like is the best source of trusted news in print? Whether it be New York Times, Wall Street Journal, CNN, like who do you all trust the most?
I honestly, I know everyone's like, it's a liberal, New York Times, whatever. I really think there are amazing, incredible journalists working at all the major newspapers in this country. Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, New York Times. I think they're all amazing journalists. I feel like, journalists are doubting Thomases. We're all skeptics. We all question everything. And I don't feel like a lot of the bias screens are fair, honestly. I feel like there's a lot of really good journalism going on. Read a lot of sources, Go ahead and if you are a conservative, read Fox News, but also read some of the other things. I've always kind of been a CNN person, and I've started making myself watch both MSNBC and Fox News now, just to kind of just get the better feel for what the divide and conversation differences are like, and what the coverage differences are like. And I find it fascinating, actually.
Well, I've always been a fan of the New York Times. I don't always agree with the New York Times, but I've always been a fan of the journalists. And I think really from a business perspective, the Wall Street Journal still.
And I agree with both of those, and from the political perspective, I really trust a lot of the things that I read in Politico. It's opinionated, but really lays out well a lot of the issues, but I don't take that as one trusted source like these guys said. You've got to look at all of them and come to some conclusion yourself.
You can, my firm does an annual Christmas card that is started as a political parody, and now we're trying to expect it every year.
It is the best Christmas card in region. It's always awesome.
And a couple of years ago, it was a picture, Santa leaves the North Pole. And on one side I had Hannity, on the other side I had Maddow. And Hannity was saying something to the effect of, drill now. And Maddow was saying that there's, workers' rights were being misconstrued at the North Pole. How the stories were both.
Right.
So get different opinions.
Yeah.
And make your own mind. Thank you.
All right, well, our time is up, and I really appreciate our panelists. We could go on and on for a long time, and I know some of you got to get back to work, right? And so let's give this group up.